Hello everyone. In this video, I will mainly talk about the imaging performance of the Find X9 Ultra smartphone and do an imaging comparison in landscape mode. Why these three phones? Because first, the Honor's imaging configuration is well known. The Honor Magic 8 Pro or Porsche version has an imaging configuration that is just a Pro version, which is clearly not suitable for landscape mode, right? It doesn't make much sense. Then Vivo, because its focal length and main features are quite different from these three phones. It focuses on a full focal length main camera, for example. Its ultra-wide angle is definitely ahead, and the main camera's focal length is different, so comparing them here is inappropriate. I saw someone comparing Vivo with them, and not using the same focal length for the main camera, then saying Vivo took the latest shot. This can lead to misunderstandings because its 1.5x is definitely the latest shot. But the focal lengths are different, so what's the point of saying that? Therefore, I think putting these three phones with similar focal lengths together for an imaging comparison is still quite valuable. Let's take a look at the imaging configurations of these three phones. As for Huawei, it actually has, 5 lenses. Plus its red light lens, it has 5 lenses. This is unique to it, called dual-purpose lens. Everyone knows this, balancing a 4x zoom and an ultra-long view. Then Xiaomi has 3 lenses. It doesn't have a color restoration lens like Huawei or Oppo, but it has a variable zoom telephoto, which I tested several times. This telephoto is indeed quite powerful, and this new Oppo phone has indeed launched a 10x telephoto, first among these new phones. It's been a long time since I've seen that. I think the last time 10x telephoto was popular was with Huawei and Samsung, right? Who else? Let me think. It seems Xiaomi 10, called the Supreme version, also had 10x. I remember that, but it's been a while, so I'm not too sure. At that time, it seemed like only these three phones had the 10x zoom. I remember at that time, they were indeed very powerful. Samsung was once considered a concert tool for several years, but now it has gradually been replaced by our domestic phones because many domestic phones have independent lenses. With external lenses, they are even more powerful. Let's not talk too much. Let's directly see how their imaging performance is. Let's start with the ultra-wide angle. Huawei has always been a bit wider. In fact, Xiaomi had a few phones before, I can't remember which ones, that achieved 12 nm, 13 minute, but now they are getting narrower. Only Huawei and Honor's ultra-wide angles still maintain a relatively wide perspective. I think ultra-wide angles should be this wide. Without zooming in, I think Huawei is the best. When zoomed in, I think Oppo is slightly better in terms of visual comfort, although neither is great. Now, let's look at the main camera. The main camera of Huawei is slightly weaker. When evaluating the main camera of Huawei compared to the other two without zooming in, I think the difference is quite small. It's really hard to tell a significant difference. In terms of visual performance after zooming in, I personally feel that in this scene, Huawei is slightly worse than the other two. Indeed, it's a bit worse. I think Oppo's visual performance is better, with more details, possibly because it outputs higher pixels by default. In this night scene, it also plays a certain role. Let's take a look at the rear camera. How is their performance in night scenes? Without zooming in, the visual performance is quite good. There are some color differences. Huawei's color is a bit deeper, but not too deep. When zoomed in, it can be seen that Oppo is indeed better, with more details. Now, let's look at the mid-range focal length. Huawei's mid-range is 89 nm, about 4x. Xiaomi is 3.2, and Oppo is about 3x. Oppo's 3x is a first launch, should be the O52A, this domestic group from Liani. I'm quite looking forward to its performance. When zoomed in, we can clearly see that Huawei's smaller sensor indeed cannot compete with their larger sensor. Especially Huawei's control over the lighting. The control of the light strip is not as good as that of other brands. Now we come to 10 times zoom. For 10 times, Xiaomi is. I chose 8.6 times for Xiaomi. It's about the same. Because Xiaomi only has one lens, it zooms to this magnification, while Huawei and Oppo are basically considered native focal lengths. Huawei's is also considered a native 10 times. But here, without zooming in, the effect is already apparent. Oppo is clearly much stronger than Huawei. The details can be seen without zooming in. After zooming in, it's very obvious that Huawei is the worst among the three, because its sensor is the smallest. Oppo is clearly the best and strongest, with the most details, including small English letters that can be seen, while Huawei cannot. Xiaomi is second. Now, let's look at the extreme night scene situation. This is ultra-wide angle, and this Oppo indeed doesn't perform well here, while Xiaomi and Huawei are both okay. Looking at Huawei when zoomed in, it doesn't perform as well as before. Oppo's zoomed-in center looks better than the previous non-zoomed view, but its edge performance is indeed not great. Looking at the main color, all three performed very brightly. Huawei's is particularly bright, while Oppo's image has a bit too much noise. Zooming in confirms this. The blue flower's color looks quite dull. Xiaomi and Huawei perform much better. Although Huawei's sensor may not be the largest, it might leverage the ROI for an advantage in night scenes, especially in extreme night scenes. Now for the mid-range, Xiaomi directly adjusted the main color for shooting, possibly knowing the aperture. Huawei and Oppo can also do this, just cutting out the mid-range for shooting. The effect is quite good. By default, I didn't select that. Xiaomi may have turned off the automatic lens switching, but I selected the default. Here, Xiaomi definitely has the best aperture, but in terms of details, it can match Oppo's details. However, the color and image quality... It exploded, right? The aperture indeed isn't good. Let's look at the daytime performance. The foot is super... Huawei's sky seems to be bluer than the other two. When zoomed in, it is clear that Oppo is better, although Huawei also outputs around 522 pixels by default. However, my visual impression is not as good as Xiaomi's. The sharpening is a bit severe. Now looking at the main color, it seems Huawei didn't switch over. Let's directly compare Oppo and Xiaomi. In terms of main color, we can see that Oppo's high pixel count still doesn't have the advantage of the previous ultra-wide angle. After all, Xiaomi's sensor is very large. Now let's look at the rear camera. For the rear camera, Oppo's default output is still 25 million pixels, so after zooming in, it indeed has an overwhelming advantage over Xiaomi. Xiaomi's optimization is already very good, but Oppo still has more details. However, Huawei's performance is not as good when zoomed in. Now, this is their mid-range performance. Because the focal lengths are different, everyone can compare. In the mid-range, it's clear that Xiaomi performs better, with very good image clarity and less severe sharpening. Huawei's entire image sharpening looks a bit unappealing. As for Oppo, it seems like they did some softening processing, but the details are still okay, but it doesn't look as clear as Xiaomi's. Now, let's zoom into 10 times. The effect at 10 times zoom can be seen. Oppo is clearly better in terms of color, reproduction and detail performance. Sorry, the other brands are not as good. Let's zoom to 30 times. At 30 times, if you don't look closely, the difference doesn't seem very big. But if you look closely at the details, Oppo is clearly better. After zooming in, you can see that Oppo's various detailed textures are more than those of other brands. Now let's look at this high contrast scene. This is ultra-wide angle, and Xiaomi compresses the light very heavily, turning the sun into a small circle, while Oppo is second, and Huawei's light control isn't very good. The performance when zoomed in is like this. Here, I think Xiaomi performs the best in this scene. Now, looking at the main color, it seems Huawei's light compression has... Whoa, Let's take another look at the backlight details. Let's look at the mid-focus again. The mid-focus is the best on Xiaomi's side. Oppo's 3 times. I think there's a scene that really needs optimization. Perhaps it's because the initial setup hasn't been perfected yet. This is 10 times. After 10 times magnification, Oppo is indeed the best here. Let's take a look at their macro performance in macro. Xiaomi gets a bit closer and switches to the main color shot. Then Huawei hasn't gotten particularly close yet, but it's already a bit closer than other phones. You see, it's 89 nm compared to Oppo's 139. I said it was 3 times. I shot it 6 times. It's already very close. Huawei can get a bit closer. That's the fact. Then Xiaomi is a bit further away. Its macro effect is like this. Oppo's 10 times. I pulled it a bit further. It can also take this kind of effect. Overall, Oppo's mid-focus lens has certain macro capabilities, but for long focus 10 times, you need to pull it quite far, but it can still take good effects. Huawei can indeed get very close. This is Huawei's exclusive, but I think macro is something. Personally, I don't think its effect is particularly significant, not as useful as long focus. To add, like Oppo, because of its high pixels. It's high pixel. When you open 50 million high pixels, it prompts that you can shoot it 2 times and 6 times. So let's look at its 2 times, which is the main color cropped to 50 million performance. It is indeed far ahead. This is really not debatable. Then let's look at its 6 times. At 6 times, I also set Xiaomi to 6 times, and Huawei forgot to shoot 6 times. Its 6 times high pixel crop also performs well. Cropping to 50 million is still good. The comparison of these 3 in photography is about this. Overall, its 10 times lens performs indeed well in many scenes, whether in daylight or nightlight environments. Its 10 times performance is indeed above 10 times performance among these 3 should be the best. Then there's O52A. I think it performs well in some scenes, but in some scenes, I think it can perform even better. Maybe later, it can be optimized. It is said that Xiaomi 18 will also be released. One is CMOS. Let's take a look at their video performance. Looking at their video performance, first look at the ultra-wide 4K60. The difference in ultra-wide is not very large. Huawei is slightly less detailed. The other 2 are about the same. Stability is not much different. They were not shot at the same time, so the progress is slightly different. Then, let's look at the main camera. The stability of the main camera is good, but Huawei's colors are slightly different from theirs. The ground is a bit reddish and warm. Then, in terms of details, Xiaomi and Oppo are both good. Huawei is second. Then let's look at the mid-focus. One is 3.2, one is 3 times, one is 4 times. In terms of stability, Huawei is slightly worse, while Xiaomi and Oppo perform well. Clarity is best with Xiaomi. Then let's look at the 10 times performance. At 10 times, Xiaomi is a bit shaky, but clarity is still good. Huawei is not doing well. Clarity is very poor. Oppo is the strongest. Then let's look at the night scene 4K30 video. In terms of viewing, I think this shot looks best from Huawei. Oppo's noise is really a bit explosive. Then, let's look at the main camera. The difference among the 3 is not very large in this scene. In terms of light control, Huawei is a bit too dark. Then, let's look at the mid-focus. In terms of mid-focus performance, Huawei is still good because Huawei's focus is further. It has a bit more detail. Then let's look at 10 times. At 10 times this industry, I still think Huawei's performance is the best, followed by Oppo, then Xiaomi. Perhaps Huawei's rib performs better at night. Alright, the image comparison is all done. Did this Find X9 Ultra meet your expectations? For me personally, I think its overall image performance is still good. This 10 times lens performance is indeed good in many scenes. These three phones are absolutely the best, the most stable as well. Also, this 3 times lens, I think this time it should be able to perform a bit better. I guess this is due to the initial release. Further optimization is still. I also look forward to it, that is, Oppo can slightly upgrade the ultra-wide in the next generation, not just Oppo. Including Xiaomi, the ultra-wide needs to be slightly improved. It must be, like Vivo size, perhaps a little more improvement. Then it would be even better. When will we get a triple lens? That is, 3 variable lenses. I think the next model might just appear.